My stepmom seduced me. It all started shortly after Susan married James, becoming the new stepmother to his son, 22-year-old Michael. From the moment she arrived in their household, the tension was palpable. Susan was a stunning woman, tall, with an hourglass figure, fiery red hair, and piercing green eyes. She carried herself with a confidence and sensuality that was impossible to ignore. And young Michael, try as he might, found himself captivated by her alluring presence. At first, it was little more than shy glances and lingering stares. Michael would catch himself mesmerized by the way Susan moved, the graceful curve of her hips, the tantalizing glimpse of her shapely legs. And Susan, well, she seemed to revel in the attention, subtly adjusting her posture or the way she sat to draw his eye. The sexual tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife, but both Michael and Susan did their best to maintain propriety. After all, Susan was now Michael's stepmother. Any inappropriate relationship between them would be completely unacceptable. But Susan, it seemed, had other ideas. One evening, about 6 months after the wedding, Michael was home alone when she sauntered into the living room wearing nothing but a silk robe. His heart began to race as she sat down next to him, her leg brushing against his. "Hey there, handsome," she purred, her voice dripping with seduction. "Your dad's going to be out late tonight. It's just the two of us." She placed her hand on his thigh, her fingers tracing tantalizing patterns on his skin. Michael felt a surge of electricity at her touch, his body betraying the taboo thoughts racing through his mind. "Susan, I don't think—" He started to protest, but she silenced him with a finger pressed against his lips. "Shh, don't overthink this," she whispered. "Just go with it." And with that, she leaned in and pressed her lips against his in a deep, passionate kiss. Michael's rational mind seemed to short-circuit, and he found himself kissing her back, his hands reaching out to pull her closer. The robe fell open, revealing the lacy black lingerie she wore underneath. Michael drank in the sight of her toned, curvaceous figure, his hands roaming over her soft skin as she moaned softly against his mouth. Before long, they were a tangled mess of limbs, shedding clothes as they explored each other's bodies. Susan's skilled touch sent shivers of pleasure through Michael, and he was utterly captivated by her sensual movements. They made love right there on the couch, their forbidden tryst unfolding in a haze of passion and desire. Susan rode Michael slowly, grinding her hips against his in a maddening rhythm as he clutched at her, fighting to keep from unraveling too quickly. When the initial frenzy had passed, they lay tangled together, basking in the afterglow. Susan traced lazy patterns on Michael's chest, a satisfied smile on her face. "That was even better than I imagined," she purred. Michael was still reeling, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Had he really just slept with his stepmother? It felt so wrong, yet so incredible at the same time. In the days that followed, Susan made it clear that this was just the beginning. She would seek him out, stealing heated kisses and caresses whenever they were alone. It was a constant battle for Michael to resist her advances, but she was relentless in her pursuit. One afternoon, as Michael was studying in his room, Susan slipped in and locked the door behind her. Before he could say a word, she was on him, pressing him back against the bed as she kissed him deeply. "I need you, Michael," she breathed against his lips. "Right here, right now." Her hands made quick work of his clothes, and soon they were a tangle of bare limbs on the bed. Susan straddled his hips, guiding him inside her with a low moan of pleasure. They moved together in a desperate primal rhythm, both of them chasing that elusive peak of ecstasy. Susan threw her head back, her auburn hair cascading down her back as she rode him relentlessly. "Oh God, Michael," she gasped. "You feel so good inside me." Michael was completely undone, his every sense consumed by the woman above him. The forbidden nature of their tryst only heightened the intensity, driving him closer and closer to the edge. When they finally collapsed, spent and trembling, Susan curled up against Michael's side, a satisfied smile on her face. "That was amazing," she purred, pressing a tender kiss to his lips. "We have to do this again soon." And so their illicit affair continued, with Susan always finding new ways to tempt and seduce Michael. Sometimes it was a stolen moment in a darkened hallway, other times a raucous encounter in the shower. Wherever and whenever, she couldn't seem to get enough of him. Michael knew it was wrong, that they were playing with fire. But the allure of Susan's body, the intoxicating scent of her skin, the way she moved against him, it was all too much to resist. He was utterly, helplessly under her spell. As the months wore on, the guilt and shame began to weigh heavily on Michael. He knew they couldn't keep this up forever, that eventually they would be caught. But Susan was insatiable, always wanting more. One night, as they lay tangled together, she turned to him with a serious expression. "Michael, I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. Michael felt his heart sink. This had gone too far, spiraled out of control. He had to put a stop to it, no matter how much it would hurt. "Susan, we have to stop this," he said firmly. "It's wrong. It's illegal. We can't keep doing this." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment Michael saw a glimpse of vulnerability beneath the seductress facade. "But I need you," she pleaded. "I need you. Please, Michael, don't leave me." He steeled his resolve, knowing he had to be the stronger one. "I'm sorry, Susan, but this has to end. We can't keep sneaking around like this. It has to stop for both our sakes." She broke down in tears, burying her face against his chest. Michael held her, torn between comforting her and standing firm in his decision. In the end, he knew he had to put a stop to their illicit affair, no matter how much it pained him. The risk was simply too great, and he couldn't keep betraying his father's trust. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. But Michael walked away, severing the tangled web of passion and desire that had ensnared them. The memory of Susan's broken sobs would haunt him for a long time, but he knew it was the right thing to do. Here is a revised ending to the story, focusing on the long-term consequences for all involved. Their forbidden love affair had run its course, but the fallout would echo through their lives for years to come. In the days and weeks that followed, Michael was a mere shadow of his former self. The guilt and shame of what he had done weighed heavily on him, making it nearly impossible to function. Every time he looked at his father, he was consumed by the suffocating weight of his betrayal. And Susan, well, she was a mess. The loss of Michael had left her completely shattered. She tried to go on as normal, putting on a facade for her husband, but the cracks were impossible to hide. She would break down in tears at the most inopportune moments, unable to shake the aching void left by Michael's absence. Inevitably, the truth came to light. One evening, after far too much wine, Susan confessed everything to James. The devastation on his face was absolute, a look of pure betrayal and heartbreak that Michael would never be able to unsee. In the end, the fallout was catastrophic. James immediately filed for divorce, unable to even look at Susan without being overcome by the magnitude of her deception. And Michael, well, his relationship with his father was completely and irreparably shattered. The once close family was torn apart, ripped to shreds by the consequences of their forbidden tryst. Susan was left alone, her marriage in ruins, and her stepson refusing to even speak to her. And Michael, he was left to pick up the pieces, to try and rebuild a relationship with his father that may never be the same. The scars of their indiscretion would linger for years, haunting them at every turn. Whenever Michael saw his father, he would be consumed by guilt. And Susan, she would be forever tainted by the knowledge that she had destroyed her own marriage and the family she had come to love. In the end, their all-consuming passion had come at an impossibly high price. The long-term repercussions were severe, leaving them all to grapple with the weight of their choices for the rest of their lives. There would be no easy road to healing, no clear path back to the way things once were. Michael and Susan had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and now they would have to live with the consequences of their actions. The forbidden love that had once consumed them now hung over them like a dark cloud, a constant reminder of the devastation they had wrought. And as they each struggled to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, they would be forced to confront the harsh reality that some mistakes can never truly be forgiven.